There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is a dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast, Twilight Zone Edition. I'm your host, Scott Eric Candiati, and joining me this evening for another journey into the realm of imagination, we welcome Brian Hewlett. Glad to have you here, Brian.
Glad to be back, Scott, and I know we've been on a little bit of a hiatus because of things going on in our lives, so we want to apologize to the listeners for that, but real life sometimes intervenes, and we're back with 2 good episodes and lots of prep work, and hopefully you'll enjoy this.
I certainly do hope so, because as you said, on this unfortunately far too long delayed podcast, we will be delving into a pair of Serling-penned Twilight Zone episodes, Nightmare as a Child, and A Stop at Willoughby, which are the 29th and 30th episodes from the first season of The Twilight Zone. They originally aired back on April 29th and May 6th of 1960. So let us begin by pulling back the covers from Nightmare as a Child. The episode was directed by Alvin Ganzer. We have actually discussed Mr. Ganzer a little bit before, as he directed both the episodes What You Need and The Hitchhiker. He also directed one of the last episodes of this season, The Mighty Casey, but since we have gone through his bio before, specifically on STVD episode 434, that was the one when we covered What You Need and The Great When the Sky Was Open, we can move on. I did say from the top, this episode, as well as the next one we'll be discussing, they were both written by Rod Serling, so we can move right to the cast. In the lead role of Helen Foley, we have Janice Rule, also known as Mary Janice Rule. Born in Norwood, Ohio, she danced in a club as a teenager to pay for ballet lessons. Perhaps that was the inspiration for Flashdance. Nah. She soon became a face to watch, even listed as such with a Life magazine cover she appeared on in 1951. But her Hollywood career got off to a bumpy start, first being treated poorly by her famous, but at this point maybe infamous, co-star Joan Crawford in her debut film Goodbye, My Fancy. Janice found her early years in the Hollywood studio system to be especially trying. The way women were treated, the emphasis on beauty, and the role that PR played in everything, public relations, in case anyone doesn't know what PR means. She ended up losing contracts, decided to work on the stage rather than appear in the film On the Waterfront, although it was that stage work that led her to find her and meet and marry her third husband, Ben Gazzara. She did appear in a handful of well-known films and TV series over the course of her lifetime, most notably Bell, Book, and Candle with Jimmy Stewart, The Swimmer with Burt Lancaster, and all the way to the 80s with Missing with Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek. Perhaps more fascinating was her decision to also become a practicing psychotherapist, which she did as well as act for the last 30 years of her life. Now, I suppose we should touch on Terry Burnham, the child actress who plays Margie. Although as a child and then young actress, Terry Burnham did appear in a handful of other projects, most notably the film Imitation of Life, that was done just before this Twilight Zone episode, it's really this Twilight Zone episode and appearance that she's most well known for, because, as a matter of fact, she retired from acting at the age of 22. She died over 40 years later in relative obscurity. In fact, after her passing, her body remained at the Los Angeles City morgue for years, until a fan of her and that specific Twilight Zone episode purchased her remains, had them transported from coast to coast, and arranged for her to be buried in a cemetery in Westchester here in New York. That was a specific cemetery that was especially devoted to people in the entertainment industry. Now, it means it actually took nearly 5 years for Terry Burnham to receive a proper burial, but it did eventually happen. I found that to be just such a fascinating story that a fan would go to such lengths, but it's also, a sign of such amazing respect. I thought it was worth sharing. Next, we have Shepard Strudwick, who is the instantly suspicious, friendly Peter Selden who appears at Helen Foley's door in this episode. Strudwick actually had a substantial film career. He was a solid character actor who often was given roles with a certain dark or shady nature to them, appearing in notable films such as All the King's Men, A Place in the Sun, Joan of Arc. He actually even played Edgar Allan Poe in The Loves of Edgar Allan Poe, an early 1940s film. Now, while he was still getting smallish film parts, he really transitioned more to television a bit later in his career, not just with this Twilight Zone appearance, but in primetime series such as Perry Mason, Have Gun Will Travel, even Car 54, Where Are You? For a good part of the 60s, he was probably best known for his ongoing role on the daytime soap opera Another World. He actually appeared in 150 episodes of that. And then he returned to soap operas yet again in the mid-70s by appearing on 87 episodes of One Life to Live. He essentially finished his career on a kind of a high note because he had a Tony-nominated performance in 1981, but sadly he died just 2 years later from cancer. Oh, that little girl we see at the end of this episode, that's Morgan Brittany. Now, a few may recall her from her role also as a child actress back then in Hitchcock's The Birds. She actually appears in 2 more Twilight Zone episodes, including, it'll be years before we get to this one, but the devilishly creepy Caesar and Me episode from season 5. Still, I believe Morgan Brittany is best known for her role in the 80s mega hit series Dallas. She was Pam Ewing's occasionally unhinged sister, Catherine Wentworth. In fact, I believe she was the one who tried to unsuccessfully kill Bob Ewing, not once, but twice. Actually, she shot him. That's personally my personal favorite of all the Dallas cliffhangers. And then when he was recovering in the hospital, she tried to give him a lethal injection. So that's 2 times. And then, much later, when she was trying to run over her sister Pam, Bobby pushes Pam out of the way, and then she kills Bobby as well as herself. But you know what happens? That all got reversed when Pam woke up from her dream. Yes, that's all part of the infamous dream that wiped out a season of Dallas. And now, we can shift from that infamous dream I just mentioned to the guy who deserves to be famous, Brian, talking about a nightmare. Nightmare as a child, that is. Take it away, Brian.
Nightmare as a Child begins with the narration by Mr. Serling. Month of November, hot chocolate, and a small cameo of a child's face, imperfect only in its solemnity. And these are the improbable ingredients to a human emotion, an emotion, say, like fear. But in a moment, this woman, Helen Foley, will realize fear. She will understand what are the properties of terror. A little girl will lead her by the hand and walk with her into a nightmare. The episode begins with Helen Foley, a schoolteacher, returning home. She encounters an odd girl on the steps of her apartment who knows about Helen's life, including what she likes, her past injuries, many things the girl should have no knowledge of. But it becomes readily apparent Helen has memory gaps in her past. The girl prompts her to remember that people look familiar to her, including a man in a car near her school that frightened her. The girl reveals her nickname is Marky. Helen prepares the girl a cup of hot cocoa, but suddenly becomes warm. The girl says someone is coming and flees before whoever is coming arrives to knock at the door. At the door is a man named Peter Selden, who reveals he knew Helen's mother 18 to 19 years ago. He's the same man from the car at the school. He reports to working for her mother making investments. Helen recounts some trauma had happened and she had amnesia. Mr. Selden, after saying hello, tells him that he was there the night her mother died. He heard her screaming. And in a really creepy touch, adds he had a crush on her. The tragic thing about her mother being killed that night, he says. He also is cued into the mention of a girl named Marky. He tells Helen Marky was her nickname. Helen suddenly hears Marky singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The man has a snapshot of Helen as a child, shows it to Helen, and it's the same girl she encountered on the steps of her apartment. Helen, overcome, lays on her couch, and she remembers her mom being killed by a man in her presence. She walks out. Marky is on the steps asking about the man. She has the same scar as Helen. Marky tells her she is her at 10 and tells her the events of what happened. Selden suddenly reappears behind her. He confesses that Helen's mother was going to turn him in for embezzlement. He killed her and was going to kill Helen, but she had no memory, so he decided to let her live. He has since been keeping tabs on her in case she ever remembered what occurred. They struggle in the hallway eventually, and Selden falls down the stairs to his death. A doctor and police talk about Helen and Helen's constant mentioning of this girl. The doctor recounts the child was a part of her that came out. The human imagination is often weird. Sometimes it means salvation. Eventually, Helen recovers and encounters another little girl with her doll singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on the Steps. And Helen kindly praises her and walks back into her apartment, into what appears to be brighter times. Closing narration. Miss Helen Foley, who has lived in night and who will wake up to morning. Miss Helen Foley, who took a dark spot from the tapestry of her life and rubbed it clean, then stepped back a few paces and got a good look at the Twilight Zone. Now, I have a few notes. Janice Rule's character, Helen Foley, was a tribute to Rod Serling's drama teacher at Binghamton Central High School, who was named Helen Foley. I thought the murder in this episode was done as a play, and it's done very quickly, very, very efficiently in Helen's flashback. It's very well done. The little girl, in being creepy and foreboding, played it excellently, almost like a possessed child you'd imagine in Children of the Corn or something, but we come to find out she's actually, there helping Helen get through something. The only issue I had with this episode, Scott, was I thought it was a little predictable, and I had one plot thing that I'd ask you as a writer. I thought it was curious the guy happened to have the picture of her on him, like when he arrives at the apartment. I know that's a contrivance, so we get the reveal of who Marky really is. But it's well done. I give the actress a lot of credit for being very out of sorts and playing out of sorts very well, seeming to drift in and out of reality and not reality. So I thought it was very, very well done to get to the economy of the story and provide it out in a quick manner. And I thought the acting in it was excellent. And this, the Selden character, whoever the actor is, went from being nice to menacing very quick. And I wonder if they put in the hint that he had a crush on her to add an element that probably wouldn't have passed the standards department of television to talk about something like that in as open a way. So they just focus on the murder of her mom. But I thought it was remarkable that the man confesses he was going to kill her too. That's unusual to see children threatened with death at television, even now, but especially at that time. So those are my thoughts about the episode.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with some of the things you just were saying. I think one of the stronger things about the episode overall would be the three performances. The child actress is more than sufficiently disturbing and creepy. She does a really good job at that. There's a certain eerie quality to her, and that's the episode overall, but I'll get to that in a second. But I also appreciate the two other leads. The actor who I mentioned before, was that Stradwick, he sort of reminded me, perhaps to a lesser degree, but there was a certain Joseph Cotton quality to what he was doing, and maybe because also he reminded me of the character that Joseph Cotton played in Shadow of a Doubt, who seemed to also have a little thing for someone who was clearly younger than him, and kind of hinting at something that maybe they shouldn't have been. Overall, I always felt that there's a certain cerebral eeriness to this episode. It kind of made it, in some way, like the perfect Twilight Zone episode that one would end up watching at 1 in the morning because everything just feels just a little bit off, just a little bit disturbing. It's very interesting that initially it appears like you're using, you know, a device that's seemingly metaphysical or supernatural, and then you come to realize this episode is really simply about dealing with trauma and repressed memories. So I kind of like that idea, and just that girl is just a manifestation of that. And we get the explanation, since I'm already brought up one Hitchcock thing, it's a little psycho-esque by having, the the backstory explanation, like, oh, now it all makes sense. I'm like, I don't know if I needed that. Um, it's it's one of those episodes that I kind of had forgotten about, and then, when I watch it, I'm like, "Oh, yeah." I was like, "This isn't a bad episode." I don't especially love it, but I don't hate it either. It's kind of lies in that, I'm glad I got to see it again. It does very much take on the form of a stage play more than a lot of other episodes. There are the occasional Twilight Zones that do have that feeling to them. I mean, and there's some very iconic ones that are like that. Um they tend to be episodes that all take place in one area, one room even. You have this one, when Robert Redford passed away, we kept seeing clips of the episode where he plays Death. That's all in one location. And there's a lot of episodes of that nature. And I don't think this one is in that strata, but it certainly was worth watching. Um, Now, this is where I normally get into, if we're getting into the wrapping up of the episode, unless there's more to talk about. If there is, feel free. And I have a tendency where I get into the tropes that I see, which sometimes I'm serious about them, sometimes I'm silly about them. I'm I was trying to keep track of these on this gigantic Excel board. I haven't gotten to it the last several episodes, so I have a lot of work on my hands. But and I'll go through what I had initially written here, because mainly this is an episode that was dealing with memories, recovered, repressed, horrible all the same. That's a Twilight Zone kind of a trope. The disturbing, creepy child, that's certainly a Twilight Zone thing. We're dealing with death again. We're dealing with a murderer trying to cover their tracks. Hey, we use a mirror a whole lot in this episode, because I just always like to point out, watch how many times mirrors are used throughout the Twilight Zone. So if you can go like 3 Twilight Zone episodes in a row without a mirror breaking, that's something. By the way, next episode, mirror breaks. But what happened, so I'm going to bring it up now. I was looking for images to use to illustrate the podcast. And when it gets posted, you see images of the 2 episodes. And I came across a website. And I think I've heard of this site in the past, but I hadn't really thought about it. But it just happened to be something when I was Googling photos, it took me to this site. And I want to make sure I give them full attribution. It's tvtropes.org. So I see how they've broken down these episodes, and especially the tropes. I adore what they do. So I think I almost want to prefer just to, give them full credit and then mention some of the things that they say here, because I think they're like really great. I'll go through them here with you, Brian, if you don't mind. First, you have the anti-hero, which is interesting, because while she's creepy, solemn, harsh, and mouthy, Marky also wants to help Helen overcome her memories of the past, learn who her mother's killer was, and ensure that they are served justice. So I wouldn't have thought of like the little girl as being an anti-hero, but that's how they kind of phrase it here. The thing I just mentioned, it's a bottle episode. The entire episode takes place entirely in Helen's apartment and the corridor outside of it. You have something called the catapult nightmare, Helen after dreaming of her mother's murder. As we just said, you have the creepy child, Marky, with her demanding manner and dead-eyed stare. Revealed to have good intentions, but she's still creepy. Now, they also keep going further. You have creepy children singing.
That's true. Very true.
Think about it. Helen hears Marky creepily singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star over and over in her mind. Then you have creepy good. Marky is a very unnerving little girl, but she's only trying to help Helen because she's Helen's repressed memories of her childhood trying to resurface, etc., etc. Then they have categories like dark and troubled past. That's actually a great trope. I don't remember if I've used it before, if I've mentioned it before, but that is a great one of like when a character has a dark and troubled past. That's kind of something. They have something called earn your happy ending. So I guess that's what happens here because after years of being subconsciously haunted by the memory of her mother's murder, Helen can finally close that chapter of her past and move on. The killer is also dead, so she won't have any fear of him coming to attack her. By the way, I can't believe I never mentioned foreshadowing as a trope. Of course, foreshadowing should be a trope. And, here we have Peter tells Helen he was the first to find her mother's dead body. Who exactly would be the first person to see a murdered body? I don't know. The murderer?
Yeah, exactly.
And, you have things like she knows too much and hoist by his own. I just like that they have all these little kind of categories. And some of them are kind of more serious. Like they have like repressed memories, like I just mentioned, or they have something like Tuckerization. Helen Foley is named after Rod Sterling's favorite teacher. I'm not sure what Tuckerization means, but it made me laugh when I read it. Anyway, you get the idea. I like laser guided karma.
That's those tropes. I think we're going to be banging the drum to say all other podcasts that talk about television shows like this should adopt the tvtropes.org style manual
Yeah, this
for
is
their
great.
discussion of tropes.
Yeah, the staircase tumble seldom. Yeah, which by the way, that's also something. Well, I have a thing where I've noticed that one of the most common ways people will die on the Twilight Zone is some form of a fall. They fall out a window, they fall from a terrace, they fall off a roof, they fall down the stairs. I I I want to at least by the time we finish all these episodes, see it. I believe more people die by falling than by either being shot or stabbed. I'm pretty sure falling is the number one way people die on the Twilight Zone.
Right. Well, I'll close the episode with a couple of just final thoughts, and
Sure.
the first is I thought that one of the remarkable things about this episode is it definitely is a callback to a different time where people hung out on stoops or hung out on steps, and that's not really something you see anymore. But back then, and there are several that's almost a Twilight Zone trope. You think about people hanging out on the stoop of their apartment or hanging out in the steps in the stairwell, watching other people go by. So I thought that was interesting. That's a callback to a different time. And the other thing I thought about, and this will be a great bridge into your episode, is that these episodes are almost yin and yang in that one is someone dreams of a murder, and that leads to a resolution that's a happy ending. Whereas in your episode, it's a little bit different than that. So if you're done, I think we can move on to the next one because that's all I have to say about this episode.
I am 1 minute from being done. The one thing I do have to do is give my ratings. Um, how I'd rate the ending of this episode. I felt the twist was rather mild but fine, but it's nothing we didn't see coming from the get-go. But I don't think it's that reveal is what makes this episode even remotely noteworthy. So I'm just going to give the ending a 6. The episode overall is better than that ending. It's not a Hall of Fame episode. I'm not sure I'd even say it's in the Hall of Very Good, but it's definitely serviceable, and I enjoyed watching it. I'm I'm really not inclined to go beyond a 6.5 for it. I've also decided to be a harder grader than I've been in the past. So, so sorry I had to take it out on this episode. I was thinking 7. I was like, nah, 6.5.
Fair enough.
So let's move on, as you said. And while Mr. Sterling did craft a rather lengthy teaser for the next episode, you know what? Nobody likes when a train is delayed. So let's commute directly to A Stop at Willoughby. The episode was directed by Robert Parrish. We briefly, and I went back and checked, very briefly, touched on Mr. Parrish in our very first Twilight Zone themed podcast, nearly a year ago. It was STVD episode 423. One of the 2 episodes covered was One for the Angels, which was also directed by Mr. Parrish. And when we get to the end of this first season of Twilight Zone, we will be incurring his name yet again, because it turns out he sort of kind of co-directed that episode, The Mighty Casey, with the previously mentioned Alvin Ganzer. There's a whole lot more to that story, but that will wait until we get to that episode. However, looking at his career and his life, I feel I should have been a little bit more expansive about Mr. Parrish because he's actually quite remarkable. First of all, he started out as an actor, a child actor to be specific. He appeared in the iconic Charlie Chaplin silent film City Lights. Throughout the 30s, he appeared in over 20 other films, and he was always listed as either an extra or just an uncredited boy. He then transitioned from acting to film editing. He actually won an Oscar for editing 1948's Body and Soul, and then he got nominated again for 1950's All the King's Men. Hey, that movie gets mentioned again. I think I was going to mention one more time in this podcast. So that film editing gig eventually led to him directing. And while he did direct a number of feature films as well as a couple TV series, I would be inclined to say his Twilight Zone work is probably what stands out the most, other than the fact that he was the man who directed the scenes in that James Bond spoof from the late 60s, Casino Royale, not to be confused with the Daniel Craig Casino Royale, like 40-something years later. He directed the scenes that featured Orson Welles and Peter Sellers. So that's something that's pretty notable in and of itself. As I've already said, this episode was written by Rod Serling, so we can go right to the cast list. At the top of the call sheet, we have James Daly as the beleaguered ad exec Gart Williams. As a young man in the 1930s, Daly was bit by the acting bug and appeared in a number of local stage shows in his home state of Wisconsin before he went off to join the military. He somehow ended up serving in not one, not two, but three different branches of the armed forces. He was first an infantryman for the U.S. Army, then he had a 2-month stint as a cadet for the U.S. Air Corps, until ultimately serving 4 years as an ensign in the U.S. Navy, and that stint was during World War II. By the way, somehow after he left the service to go back to his acting career, at that same time, his mother ended up working for the CIA. That's a story I'm way more intrigued by, considering how old his mother should have been at that point. But I don't know the story, so I digress. We'll get back to James Daly now. Post-war, he kind of carved out a sizable career on Broadway. But he eventually, as many did at the time, transitioned to television. And although he did have a handful of film roles over the years, maybe him being one of the apes in Planet of the Apes, it might be the most famous one. And there's that Rod Serling connection because, Planet of the Apes was the screenplay was written by Mr. Serling. He pretty much stayed a TV actor for the remaining 25 to 30 years of his life. Some might say he was best known as one of the characters from the 1970s drama Medical Center, because he appeared in 171 episodes of that series. Other people might say, hey, he was in an episode of Star Trek from its final season. I'm not going to tell you what episode it was because it's not really that good. It's not really that good an episode. But for 7 years, he was a TV spokesperson for Camel cigarettes, appearing in a number of spots for that cigarette brand. Right here, I know what you're thinking. You're probably expecting I'm going to tell you that he, of course, died from lung cancer. No, that didn't happen. Died of a heart attack. He was only 59. But the thing I think might be the most notable thing about him, his progeny. He was the father to a couple people you might have heard of. First of all, Tyne Daly, star of Cagney and Lacey and so many other things. She's his daughter. Tim Daly, star of Wings, and one of the folks who got to provide the voice for an animated Superman. That's his son. So, he had that working for him. Anyway, who else? Well, we should probably push to Howard Smith, who played the ever so kind and gentle boss here. Howard Smith was an accomplished and always appreciated character actor. He showed up in a number of noteworthy productions, such as Kiss of Death with Victor Mature and a maniacal Richard Widmark, Call Northside 777 with Jimmy Stewart, and one of the productions of Death of a Salesman, the one with Frederick March in the early 50s. He then reeled off appearance after appearance on any number of TV series, whether it be dramas like Perry Mason and Alfred Hitchcock Presents, or comedies like Bewitched and Green Acres. He would die about 8 years after filming this episode, but not before he did appear in one additional Twilight Zone episode, a much lighter and sillier episode than this one, Season 3's Cavender is Coming. I don't really have much to say about Patricia Donahue, who played Gart's wife, Janie. She was a TV actress who honestly worked fairly steadily for decades until she retired in the 1980s after a few appearances in General Hospital. And she didn't pass away until almost 40 years later, so I guess she just had enough of acting. But I will point out one more person, just one more. The present or modern day conductor on the train. He's played by a fairly recognizable character actor named Jason Wingreen, excuse me. Now, Mr. Wingreen, he came from my hometown of Brooklyn, New York. He even attended and graduated from my alma mater, Brooklyn College. Now, some of our older listeners, like my age, the 50 to 50 and up crowd, you might actually remember him from All in the Family and Archie Bunker's Place. He was Harry the bartender in so many episodes. He's actually one of the very few people who have ever played a part in both the Star Trek and Star Wars universes. He's also in a rather annoying episode of Star Trek. He's in the one called The Empath. Ugh, hate that episode. But more amazingly, he was the original voice of Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back. Unfortunately, a few years back, the voice for Boba Fett got re-recorded, for the current actor was playing on that TV series. Thanks, George. But he was the original Boba Fett, voice-wise at least. He wasn't the guy in the outfit. And also, one of his very last acting appearances was on an episode of Seinfeld. You can actually spot him, albeit briefly, in the opera episode from season 4 of that series. He only passed away like 10, 11 years ago.
Hmm.
And with all of that, let's climb aboard and take a trip through a stop at Willoughby. We open on a boardroom meeting, ad execs seated around a table, the imposing figure of a craggy-faced and overbearing boss boring his eyes into a nervous man at the opposite end of the table. And now we get to Mr. Sterling's narration. This is Gart Williams, age 38, a man protected by a suit of armor, all held together by one bolt. Just a moment ago, someone removed the bolt, and Mr. Williams' protection fell away from him and left him a naked target. He's been cannonaded this afternoon by all the enemies of his life. His insecurity has shelled him. His sensitivity has straddled him with humiliation. His deep-rooted disquiet about his own worth has zeroed in on him, landed on target, and blown him apart. Mr. Gart Williams, ad agency exec, who, in just a moment, will move into the Twilight Zone in a desperate search for survival. Now, as Mr. Sterling just indicated, after this man has been lambasted and humiliated by his pushing boss, Williams takes the commuter train back to his home somewhere, I presume in Connecticut, which, interesting side note, means the trip that Gart Williams is continuously taking from his suburban home in Connecticut to working in New York City mirrored Rod Serling's own train commute when he wrote this episode, as he was constantly commuting from Connecticut to New York City on a near daily basis in 59 and 1960. Anyway, trivia off, story back on. It's on this train that Williams dozes off, and he's awoken as a conductor is announcing the next stop on the train is pulling into is Willoughby. Williams seems to barely take notice that the interiors of the train have changed considerably, as well as the actual conductor himself. And as Williams looks out the window, it's as if he's been transported to the 1880s, or 1888 to be exact. And he looks out at an idyllic-looking town, a place where one can finally kick back and relax, a place where one can rest. Later, when he tells his wife, she can only mock him. A modern man who dreams about living the life of Huckleberry Finn. Williams has another experience on the train, and after he snaps out of that Willoughby wonderland, he vows the next time he's going to get off that train. Later, perhaps it was the very next day, Williams has a very bad scene at work. His professional life has gone off the rails. His boss is putting the screws to him. He even has a bit of a meltdown or breakdown in the office. Calling his wife does no good at all. But he takes that train again, and this time he does get off at Willoughby. This time he gets off for good. In a really nice dissolve, we see the swinging pendulum of a clock at the Willoughby station. It becomes the swinging lantern being held by a train engineer, and he's standing over a body. It's Gart Williams' body. And as we learned from the modern-day conductor, we learned that Williams had jumped off the train, had shouted something about Willoughby before hurtling to his death. At that point, is accentuated by the shutting of the back door of a hearse that's now carrying his body, and emblazoned on the hearse, Willoughby and Son Funeral Home. And so we close thusly. Willoughby, maybe it's wishful thinking nestled in a hidden part of a man's mind, or maybe it's the last stop in the vast design of things, or perhaps for a man like Mr. Garth Williams, who climbed on a world that went by too fast, it's a place around the bend where he could jump off. Willoughby, whatever it is, it comes with sunlight and serenity, and it's a part of the Twilight Zone. Now, let me start by saying that even though A Stop at Willoughby, I believe, is considered to be in the upper echelon of iconic Twilight Zone episodes, whether it be from the opening scene featuring the classic, "This is a push, push, push business, Williams. It's push, push, push all the way, all the time, right down the line," to probably one of the more creative little twist endings. Before I sat down to do a rewatch of this episode, and it's probably been at least 10, 15 years since I last watched it, I didn't recall myself being that big a fan of the episode. Even knowing that this is Serling's personal favorite from season 1, I knew that before I started watching, didn't faze me. But it turns out, and I'm thinking now maybe it's due to maturity or age or how my life perspective has changed so much from my teenage years or 20s to the way I look at life now. When I look at an episode like this one, or even earlier ones this season, like Walking Distance, or maybe even World of Difference, I'm looking at them in a totally different and new way. These are episodes that maybe in the past when I was younger, I wouldn't say that they bored me. They certainly didn't. But now I find them tapping into a more cerebral situation because they seem to be about as one gets older, one looks at the life that he or she has led, and there can be a level of dissatisfaction coupled with, I don't know, maybe an overwhelming sense of loss, either it be the dreams one once had, or the sense of identity that could be fleeting the more one tends to doubt oneself and the choices that you make. Now, A Stop at Willoughby trods over some ground we've seen before and will see again, as clearly, well, Serling certainly has a special reserve of venom reserved for the business world, and especially those in the ad biz, which in of itself is sadly ironic, since he had to serve as a TV pitchman himself for years, and for in most, if not all, the Twilight Zone episodes doing ads for cigarettes. Cigarettes he clearly smoked himself and were eventually the chief contributor to his own early demise. But here we're watching an episode where we've seen this man wishing to escape his life before, but wanting to strip away the chokehold of that suit and tie. And yes, we're going to see that in future episodes and seasons of the Twilight Zone. But in this specific episode, there is a certain elegance and grace to how both the dream is first established and then ultimately realized. Even as when we learn in the end, once again, when a character wishes to transverse his or her location, his or her life, it really means that they are actually ending their current life. I mean, if you think about the episodes we've already seen this season, those that end with a character either choosing a different dimensional existence or having it forced upon them as some sort of karmic resolution or punishment. As the episodes I just mentioned a few moments ago, but you can see a form of that in several other episodes, from everything from Perchance the Dream to Judgment Night to the 16mm Shrine and so on. But I think this episode is the one that clearly gives us both, and it does it definitively. We see Garth Williams finally get off that train for his version of paradise, of Shangri-La. And yes, it's a sweet and simple and pleasant throwback to a bygone era, free of worry and pressure, where the only push is pushing a boy on a swing, perhaps. But we also learn that this is his delusion, that in reality he does actually die, throwing himself off a train. And that imaginary fantasy stop of Willoughby is likely a name he saw on a sign or a billboard or the side of a car promoting the local funeral home, Willoughby and Son. Now, I'll go more into my overall opinion a little bit later, but Brian, since I have spoken quite a bit here, I was curious to hear what your thoughts were on the episode, or what I said, and if you had a strong memory of this from seeing it years ago or not.
I didn't, but as it got closer to the end, I remembered it. Like it took me a while to lock into what it was. But I really liked it, and I totally agree with the first part of your analysis that watching this today, being somebody who's, about the age of Mr. Williams, uh, the dissatisfaction with work and with the way you're relentlessly pushed to do more, and wanting maybe something different out of life can really play havoc on a person. And the thoughts I noted while watching it were I thought the boss, there was something about him that in my mind, like I could see him played, I could see that character being in a Coen Brothers movie being played by like John Polito or Michael Lerner. Like, being that character, like, in the Hudsucker Proxy or so, yeah, the boss that's really, you know, um, comically over the top, but you could see would drive someone crazy. I thought the twist was nice that the dream destination is a name, but it actually is a stand-in for death. And I thought Serling adeptly worked in the idea that his character's in the ad business, but much of the conversation towards the end was his boss telling him to come up with a TV show that would sell a product and to have 2 or 3 ideas. And I would imagine if you could have probed Mr. Serling's mind, there was someone he dealt with that was the model for this guy to say there are these type of people that, want to push things to sell on people that don't care about the artistry. And in Williams's lament to his wife, he talks about wanting to do something for him, something that, would make him happy. And everyone in his life doesn't want what he wants. They want the money, the television show, the success. And so you see, it presents in a really interesting way that, like, that his choice, while terrible, was the most rational choice maybe for him based on the scenario you're given in the episode. And you're really pulling for him that maybe he made it there, that maybe he did make it to Willoughby, even if his body's not here, that he did make it there in some dimension. And I thought that was nice. And so in both this episode and the last episode, arguably both characters may have had a happy ending with weird ways of getting there. And that's what I'm hoping for. Um, and with the vagueness, you're allowed to believe that if you want. And, when I was 28, I'd have said this guy was a dumbass. And at 55, I think maybe he was onto something.
Huh, huh. Well, that's why I wanted to paint a picket fence. Yeah, it's interesting when you mention the thing with the ad business, but talking about developing shows because being a student of history, television history, the way I am, um, and many other people would know this too if they just know what they understand, like the golden age of TV more specifically than any other era. The hand that sponsors had in programs. You have to realize just think about all these programs throughout the 50s that the name of the product sponsoring was actually in the title of the show. It's kind of like nowadays we just name stadiums after products. Back then it was TV shows, and they were actually trying to design TV shows to work with the product, and the sponsor had, first say and who would be in a show and what it was about and what would be acceptable. Whether it be, and just think that all these shows that have different, like, soap products or the Colgate this or this, that, whatever. There's so many of them. And
Flour.
even though they didn't mention it in the title of the show, it was still worked into the show where you'd have it. And even the Twilight Zone, there are a number. I mean, we might not see them depending on where you're watching them, but if you were watching a truly uncut Twilight Zone episode, you would come across episodes that have Rod Serling doing an ad for a cigarette at the end of the episode. I think that's been deleted from most DVDs and streaming versions of it. But I remember I've seen them. I remember going to the Museum of Television and Radio and watching some Twilight Zones I had seen before, but they were completely uncut, and I would see that. I was like, oh, I don't think about Rod Serling doing commercials, but then again, they were all doing commercials. Yeah, and again, this is an episode that I was just quite taken with how much more I liked it than I thought I had before. And again, that's what I said from the top. I think it's one of those things where maybe just I am able to appreciate it more being older. It's kind of like a weird version of how there's probably Monty Python episodes I liked so much more 20 years later, but that was more because, well, I'm smart enough to understand some of the references, which I didn't know about surrealist art, when I was 5 years old. Well, maybe I did because I was doing it on the walls of the bathroom. Oh wait, that wasn't paint. Anyway, so let me I guess I should be working on the wrap up here. When I had written down my own version of the tropes here, I went through the obvious. Oh, look, ad business, execs, bad bosses, stress that leads to meltdowns, breakdowns, life changing or life ending decisions. Huh. The one thing we haven't mentioned yet. Technically, this episode features a little bit of time travel. Hey, look, here's this place that represents someone's dream. Maybe it's their childhood. Maybe it's their grandfather's childhood. We've gotten that before. We're going to be getting that again. Oh, here's a trope for you. The nasty shrew of a wife. We've already seen that more than a few times on this show, and we're going to see it again. Anything else? Well, we've got trains, we've got death, and as I mentioned before, hey, look, a scene with a mirror that results in a smash mirror. We get a bunch of shattered mirrors on Twilight Zone all the time. I'm going to take a look. I won't spend as long as I did before. I'll see if there's any really notable ones on that. Some of
Well,
them are.
these two episodes had a trope that I came up with in my mind, and it's called like the sort. And this isn't really the term for it, but it's like the ending is like a crime scene, like where
Mm,
there are people on the scene. In this, it's the train conductor and the other train conductor, and the mortuary showing up. In the previous episode, it's the doctor and the police officer. Sort of the aftermath scene where
yeah,
new characters arrive to deal with what's happened in the episode.
yeah. It goes all the way back to the very first Twilight Zone episode. Where
Right,
is everybody? We got all these characters we haven't seen for the entire episode, explaining the entire episode.
right, right.
The first couple of tropes on that TV tropes site actually go to what you were just talking about. Very first one they have here is ambiguous situation. Did Gart really end up in Willoughby, or was it all a dying dream before he ended his life? This is the Twilight Zone, and there has been more surreal stuff going on. And right after that, we have bittersweet ending. Gart has died in the real world, but it's possible Willoughby is an actual alternate dimension that he's alive and well in. So, I like the born in the wrong century is a trope. Gart's
Yeah.
wife Janie invokes the trope saying he was born too late. Gart agrees. Broken record. And then it goes through what his boss, Mr. Misrel, says the whole push, push, push. But I already went through it once. I'm not going to subject you to me doing it again. I'm just skimming through this. I like that they list domestic abuse. The emotional abuse Janie puts Gart through is just as horrible as it was meant to be. It's surprisingly ahead of its time for 1960. Empathic environment. New York, Connecticut, where Gart is utterly miserable, is cold and snowy. Willoughby, where he's happy, is in the midst of a warm and sunny summer. That's it. I never really thought about that, but that's kind of true. I'm just skimming through this. You got the henpecked husband, something called the hate sink. Both Mr. Miserable and Garth's wife are insufferably vile people who are clearly meant to be as detestable as possible. But here's one I love this. This might be my favorite one as I'm skimming over this. Jerkass has a point. Mr. Miserable rubs Garth's nose in the fact that new employee Jake Ross was not only too young for the company's project, but too unreliable and untrustworthy for it. You know what? Jerkass has a point. That's, you get the idea. Rich bitch. Wow. Snow means death. Whenever Garth's shown on the train, and at the end, when you see his corpse, it's during a November snowstorm. Oh boy. Oh yeah, and the final music that we hear in Willoughby. This is under suspiciously apropos music. The final music the band plays in Willoughby is Beautiful Dreamer. And I did notice they were playing Beautiful Dreamer. So I remember I first recognized that tune as a kid from a Looney Tunes cartoon. It's subverted in the fact that he's not dreaming per se. Oh, look at that. Anyway, you get the idea. I thought it'd be fun to share. Let me grade this one. The ending. I think I liked the ending far more than I had recalled before. And I'm going to give the ending an 8. But as for the episode itself, as I've already indicated, I'm actually a lot higher on it than I would have guessed going into it. So I'm going to push. My last joke on that one. The grade up to an 8.5. So it's getting there. It's not in the 9+ category, not in that strata, but I get now why this is as good an episode as other people have said it to me. I think once we finish the season, I might want to really think about this and Walking Distance because they're the two most similar episodes, except with different outcomes. I mean, and because totally different decisions made by that character, and it'd be interesting for me to decide which one I think is the better episode. And I know I might have given this a better grade than I don't remember the grade I gave Walking Distance. It might have given it an 8, not an 8.5. But who cares? I'm still curious to watch them back to back and decide which one I like more. So, interesting.
I think when we were young, the more supernatural, more creepy things obviously score higher on our list. And as we get older, maybe the more human stories, grade higher to us.
Right, absolutely. It just becomes, and you also, I think we also tend to appreciate them more now, and also can appreciate the fact that this was made for television at the time. Like, this wasn't something that much like that boardroom at the beginning of this episode, how are you selling this to convince someone that this is something you want to put on TV that's going to like grab viewers' eyes? And I mean, some episodes you can see how you can sell Time and Effort Last. You can see how you can sell even, Escape Clause. An episode like this, which also has a rather can be seen as a bad ending for the character or a good ending, whatever. A harder sell. So it's always, I appreciate that a show like The Twilight Zone was able to do so many episodes of this nature. Whereas when I was a kid watching, be like, oh, this isn't a fun episode.
There's no space. There's no devil.
There's no, yeah, exactly. No space, no devil, no, the guy who played Captain Kirk,
Right. Exactly.
Alrighty. So let's go for it. As we board the train away from Willoughby, and we can prepare ourselves for our next journey into the world of imagination and dark wonder. But first, we must bid farewell and thanks for our co-host on this trip. And that would be saying adieu to you, Brian. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Scott. Really enjoyed it, both these episodes, and enjoyed the conversation.
And as for you, our listeners, indeed, you maybe should prepare yourselves. Because in a couple weeks, the next Twilight Zone edition of this podcast will be covering the 31st and 32nd episodes. They had long seasons back then. From season 1. The first, a charming little episode titled The Chaser. And then that's followed by a rather melancholy one that features one of the Twilight Zone legend status actors based on how many times he appeared on the show. Personal favorite of mine, Jack Klugman in A Passage for Trumpet. I do encourage each and all of you to watch the episodes. They're available on any number of streaming services. And then you'll have this podcast to look forward to. I hope you will all join us then. Thank you, and good night.
Good night.